Monday mornings always looked the same from my office window. The building across the street reflected the sky like a dull mirror. Gray glass, gray clouds, gray routine. I arrived at 7:40 every morning, 10 minutes before anyone else on my floor, set my coffee down on the same corner of the desk, and opened the same leather-bound notebook I'd carried for years. It wasn't sentimental, it was practical. A place to write down decisions, timelines, names, and follow-ups. The kind of object that doesn't ask for attention, but quietly remembers everything. My name is Ryan. I'm 35 years old. And for most of my career, I was considered reliable, not impressive, not ambitious, reliable. The kind of employee who keeps systems running while others collect credit. The one who knows where the documentation is, how the approvals really work, and which processes fail quietly if someone forgets to maintain them. I worked in operations finance for a mid-sized property management firm, not glamorous, but stable. The kind of job where things only go wrong if someone like me stops paying attention. That morning, my calendar was empty except for one reminder I'd written weeks earlier. Review shared dependencies. At the time, it seemed unnecessary, almost paranoid. Now, it felt overdue. I'd been with the company for 6 years, long enough to see leadership change, systems evolve, and responsibilities quietly migrate downhill, not through malice, through convenience. If a vendor invoice needed fixing, it came to me. If a policy exception needed approval, just this once, it came to me. If a department overspent and needed someone to make it work without escalating, it came to me. I never pushed back, not because I was weak, because escalation costs political capital, and I'd learned early that quiet competence was rewarded with more responsibility, not more authority. I didn't mind at first. I told myself it was temporary. That reliability would eventually turn into recognition. That assumption lasted until the Friday before. It had been an ordinary afternoon. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just a brief interaction in the executive hallway that lasted less than 30 seconds and changed how I saw everything. I had been carrying a folder, nothing urgent, just updated compliance summaries for a property acquisition closing the following week. The CFO, Robert, passed me near the conference rooms. He glanced at the folder, then at his watch. "Just drop that on the assistant's desk," he said. "Don't linger." No greeting, no acknowledgement of the hours behind the report, just an instruction. Efficient, dismissive, final. I did exactly what he asked. I set the folder down and walked away. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Executives are busy. Pressure rolls downhill. This is how corporate environments work. But later that evening, the moment replayed in my head with unusual clarity. Don't linger. It wasn't anger that stayed with me. It was the implication. I wasn't being dismissed as a person. I was being dismissed as a function that had completed its task. That night, I opened my notebook at home for the first time in months. I didn't write anything dramatic. No emotional processing, no accusations, just a list. Accounts I touched but didn't own. Processes I maintained but wasn't credited for. Expenses routed through my approvals without my authority. The list was longer than I expected. There were shared vendor payment structures I had set up temporarily during a system transition that never ended. Insurance reconciliations I still reviewed monthly, even though responsibility had officially moved to another department years ago. Legacy subscriptions, service contracts, and payment methods that still pointed back to my credentials because it was easier than updating them. None of this was hidden, none of it was illegal. It was simply assumed. The company assumed I would continue to handle it, the same way people assume the lights will turn on. Over the years, I'd become something very specific inside that organization, a stabilizing mechanism, and stabilizers are invisible until they're removed. The following Monday, the same morning I sat by the window with my coffee, I attended the weekly operations call. It was routine. Department heads reported status updates. The CEO spoke about growth. The CFO talked about tightening margins. No one mentioned me. They rarely did. At one point, someone raised a concern about rising operational costs tied to older properties. Robert waved it off. Ryan's team has that under control, he said without looking in my direction. My team. I didn't have a team. I made a note in the notebook. Not out of spite, out of habit. After the call ended, I didn't speak to anyone. I went back to my desk and opened the internal finance systems. One by one, I began reviewing the shared dependencies I had flagged weeks earlier. Nothing dramatic happened that day. No alerts, no emails, no reactions. I simply confirmed something I had avoided acknowledging for years. If I stopped quietly maintaining these systems, no one above me would notice, until something failed. And when it did, they wouldn't see it as a loss. They would see it as a malfunction. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm. Calm enough to plan carefully. Calm enough to stop explaining myself. Calm enough to let the system speak for itself. I closed my notebook and wrote one final line beneath the list. No confrontation, no warning, process only. Then I went back to work like nothing had changed. The shift didn't begin with action. It began with restraint. For the rest of that week, I did my job exactly as described. No more, no less. I attended meetings. I answered emails. I delivered reports on time. Nothing in my demeanor changed. If anything, I became quieter. Silence has a way of making people comfortable. When you stop pushing back, others assume alignment. When you stop asking questions, they assume understanding. When you stop flagging risks, they assume the risks no longer exist. That assumption is a powerful thing. On Wednesday afternoon, I was copied on an email thread I hadn't seen in months. A vendor dispute regarding one of our older commercial properties. An HVAC service contract that had quietly rolled over year after year. The rates were no longer competitive. They hadn't been for a while. The operations director asked if finance could smooth it over. No name, no assignment, just expectation. I opened my notebook and flipped to a page marked with a thin black tab. It listed vendor relationships I had inherited during a departmental restructuring 3 years earlier. At the time, I had taken responsibility temporarily while procurement onboarded new staff. Procurement never did. I checked the system logs. The contract was still tied to my internal approval credentials. That meant any disputes, renewals, or escalations automatically routed through me. Even though the authority technically belonged to someone else now, I closed the email without replying, not because I was ignoring it, because it wasn't mine to answer. Later that day, my manager stopped by my desk. "Did you see the HVAC email?" she asked casually. "Yes," I said. And it's outside my scope," I replied evenly. She blinked once, not annoyed, just surprised. "Oh, I thought you still handled those." "I haven't, officially, for a while." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll reroute it." No tension, no argument. Just process correcting itself, slightly, reluctantly. That evening, I stayed late, not to work overtime, but to document. I pulled up internal policies, old approval memos, and archived emails. I noted dates, ownership changes, the quiet handoffs that were never formalized. Each entry went into the notebook, written in the same small, precise handwriting. It wasn't emotional labor. It was administrative hygiene. The next morning, I received a calendar invite, QuickSync, finance dependencies. The invite came from Robert's assistant. I accepted. The meeting was scheduled for 15 minutes. It ended up lasting 12. Robert sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone while I spoke. 2 directors joined remotely. The conversation stayed surface level. Robert cleared his throat. "We're just trying to understand where some of these operational tasks sit now." "I can explain," I said, "or I can show you." That got his attention. I slid a single-page summary across the table. No dramatics, just clean formatting. Columns, dates, responsibility markers. Robert skimmed it. "These are still active?" he asked. "Yes." "And you've been maintaining them?" "Yes." "Why wasn't this escalated?" I paused. Not for effect, just long enough to answer honestly. "It was assumed," I said. No accusation, no edge. He nodded once, as if that explained everything, because to him, it did. "Well," he said, We'll clean this up eventually. Eventually. I wrote the word in my notebook when I returned to my desk. By Friday, small things began to surface. A subscription renewal bounced because my corporate card had been removed as a backup payment method. A vendor escalated a question because the usual internal contact no longer responded. A report failed to auto-generate because a legacy script I maintained wasn't updated. Nothing catastrophic, just friction. The kind of friction organizations don't notice until it accumulates. No one confronted me. No one accused me of negligence. Instead, emails went out, tentative, cautious. Hey Ryan, quick question. Do you still handle? Can you clarify who owns? I answered each one politely, concisely, and with documentation attached. This now routes through procurement. This approval sits with compliance. This account was transitioned in Q3. Each response was factual, unemotional, unassailable. On Sunday evening, I took a walk through my neighborhood. No headphones, just the sound of traffic and the weight of the week settling into something clearer. I realized I wasn't anxious. For years, I'd lived with a low-grade tension, the feeling that if I didn't stay alert, something would fall apart and it would be my fault. That tension was gone, because it wasn't my fault anymore. Monday morning arrived quietly. At 9:12 a.m., my inbox filled with calendar updates, emergency syncs, alignment meetings, cross-functional reviews. I attended them all. In each one, the same pattern repeated. Someone described an issue. Someone asked how long it had been handled this way. Someone else asked who currently owned it, and slowly, inevitably, the silence pointed back, not at me, but at the absence of ownership above me. No one said my name with frustration. They said it with confusion. By Tuesday afternoon, Robert called me directly, not angry, curious. Ryan, he said, we're seeing some gaps. I'm aware, I replied. How long have these been dependent on you? I flipped open the notebook. 6 years, I said. Give or take. There was a pause on the line. Well, he said carefully, we'll need to stabilize things. Of course, I said, once ownership is clarified. Another pause, this one longer. I see, he said. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something steadier. The system was beginning to notice its missing supports, and I still hadn't removed myself completely. Not yet. By midweek, the tone shifted. Not in meetings, not in official communications. Those remained measured, professional, carefully neutral. The shift showed up in the margins, shorter emails, delayed responses, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. That's how organizations register discomfort. Not through conflict, through avoidance. On Wednesday afternoon, I received a message from compliance asking for clarification on a filing delay related to one of our commercial properties. It was a routine inquiry, but the language was precise. We're trying to identify where responsibility currently sits. I read the message twice. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I closed my email, shut down my computer, and walked out of the building. There was a small bar 2 blocks away. Quiet during the day, dark wood, no televisions. I ordered a coffee, not a drink, and sat by the window with my notebook on the table. This was the pause I'd been avoiding, not to reflect emotionally, but to recalibrate. For most of my career, I had confused endurance with professionalism. I believed that absorbing friction silently was part of being competent, that if something needed doing and I could do it, I should, regardless of whether it was recognized, rewarded, or even assigned. That belief had shaped my work habits, my availability, my sense of responsibility. It had also trained everyone around me to expect it. I opened the notebook to a blank page and wrote one sentence. What happens if I stop preventing problems? The answer, I was learning, wasn't chaos, it was visibility. When I returned to the office an hour later, there were 3 new messages waiting, one from procurement, one from IT, one from Robert's assistant, all variations of the same question. Can you join a quick meeting? I joined the call at 4:30 p.m. This time, it wasn't framed as a sync, it was framed as a review. Robert was there. So was legal. So was HR. The conversations stayed polite, careful, structured. They walked through a list of issues: missed renewals, unclear approvals, stalled workflows. No one accused me of causing them, but no one denied that I had been preventing them. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Why didn't we know this was all centralized with you?" he asked. I met his gaze. "You did," I said. "It just wasn't documented that way." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but instructive. HR asked about role definitions. Legal asked about risk exposure. Procurement asked how long these arrangements had been in place. I answered every question. Slowly, precisely. I didn't volunteer opinions. I didn't assign blame. I didn't offer solutions. I simply described reality as it existed. At the end of the meeting, Robert said something interesting. "We need to reassign some of this. Immediately." "Yes," I said. "And we'll need your help transitioning." I nodded. "Within my scope." Another pause. "Define that," he said. I opened my notebook. "My current job description," I said, "and any formally approved expansions." No one argued. They ended the call shortly after. That evening, I received an updated calendar invite for the following week. Role alignment discussion. This time, my name was in the title. The next day, the consequences began to take shape, not as punishment, as recalibration. Systems that once ran quietly now required sign-offs. Tasks that had flowed through me invisibly now stalled, waiting for someone else to pick them up. Meetings grew longer. Decisions took more time. Efficiency dropped, not because I had stopped working, but because the organization was now working as designed, without an unacknowledged buffer. On Friday afternoon, Robert stopped by my desk. This time, he stood. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't a reprimand." "I didn't think it was," I replied. "We value what you've been doing." I waited. "We just didn't realize the extent." I nodded. "That's on us." Another pause. "Going forward," he said, "we need to formalize this, either redistribute or redefine." "Yes," I said again. He hesitated. "And your availability?" I closed the notebook. "My availability," I said, "hasn't changed." What I didn't say was that my willingness had. That weekend, I didn't think about work. I didn't replay conversations. I didn't anticipate outcomes. I went for long walks, cooked real meals, slept without checking my phone. The quiet wasn't empty. It was intentional. Monday morning arrived with a new sense of weight, not pressure but consequence. At 8:15 a.m., an email went out company-wide. Subject: Operational Realignment Initiative. It outlined new ownership structures, updated approval chains, and revised expectations. Names were listed. Departments were accountable. Mine was included, not expanded, defined. At the bottom of the email, one line stood out. "This transition reflects a more sustainable and transparent operating model." I smiled, not because I felt vindicated, but because the system had finally acknowledged what silence had been hiding all along. And I was no longer the thing holding it together without being seen. The changes looked clean on paper. Updated charts, clear ownership, formal escalation paths, the kind of structure consultants charge a lot of money to recommend. From the outside, it appeared resolved. Inside the building, it felt different. The first sign was the meetings. They multiplied. Not emergency meetings, those had already happened, but clarification meetings, alignment sessions, follow-ups to the follow-ups. Each one existed because something that used to move quietly no longer did. People had to ask now, ask for approvals, ask for timelines, ask who was responsible, and asking takes time. On Tuesday, a senior manager stopped me near the elevators. "Can I ask you something off the record?" she said. "If it's off the record," I replied, "it usually shouldn't be asked." She smiled thinly. "Fair enough, but still, how did all this happen without us noticing?" I considered the question. "Because nothing broke," I said. "And when nothing breaks, no one checks the supports." She nodded slowly, not defensive, thoughtful. "I guess we assumed," she started. "Yes," I said, "you did." That word, assumed, kept resurfacing. In emails, in meetings, in quiet side conversations. No one accused me of withholding information. No one suggested I had acted improperly. The narrative stayed professional, controlled. But something else was happening beneath it. Authority was redistributing. Managers who had once spoken confidently now deferred. Directors double-checked details they previously waved through. Robert, in particular, had become quieter in meetings, less declarative, more observant. Power hadn't vanished. It had slowed. Midweek, I received a formal request from HR, documentation of my responsibilities over the past 6 years. Not disciplinary, administrative. I sent them the notebook scans, clean, chronological, unemotional. When HR followed up with clarifying questions, I answered them once, thoroughly. They didn't ask again. On Thursday afternoon, Robert called another meeting, smaller this time, just the two of us and HR. The tone was different, not corrective, negotiative. "We're restructuring the operations finance role," HR said, "based on actual function, not assumed contribution." Robert looked at me. "We should have done this sooner." I didn't respond, not because I disagreed, because acknowledgement doesn't require confirmation. They presented a revised role description, expanded authority, clear boundaries, fewer informal dependencies, a title adjustment, and compensation. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a windfall, it was proportional. "This reflects what you've been carrying," HR said. I scanned the document carefully. "What happens to the tasks that don't fit?" I asked. Robert answered this time. "They'll be reassigned, or they'll stop." I looked up. "Are you comfortable with that?" I asked. He held my gaze. "We'll have to be." That was the most honest thing he'd said all month. I signed the document, not because it felt like a victory, because it felt accurate. The following week, the system tested itself. Without me compensating quietly, some things failed. Not catastrophically, but visibly. A vendor contract lapsed. A report missed a deadline. A decision stalled because no one wanted to own it. Each failure triggered a response. Not panic, process. New owners stepped in. Adjustments were made. Timelines were revised. The organization adapted. And something else happened. People started coming to me, not with assumptions, but with questions. "Is this yours? Can you advise? Should this escalate?" I answered when appropriate. I declined when it wasn't, and no one challenged it. On Friday afternoon, I left early, not to make a point, because my calendar allowed it. As I shut down my computer, I noticed something I hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness, not relief, not triumph. Alignment. For years, my value had existed in the gap between responsibility and recognition. Now that gap had closed. Quietly, without confrontation, without spectacle. The system hadn't punished me for stepping back. It had corrected itself. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next problem. I was simply doing the work I was actually hired to do. The adjustment period lasted longer than anyone admitted. On paper, the restructuring was complete. In practice, habits take time to unlearn. People still defaulted to old pathways. Emails still included me unnecessarily. Meetings still assumed my presence, just in case. I handled it the same way every time. Calm clarification, written boundaries, no defensiveness. This sits with procurement now. I can advise, but I don't own this. Please loop the assigned manager. Each response was polite. Each one reinforced the same reality. Over time, the volume decreased. Not because people were offended, because systems respond to consistency. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the role changes, I received a meeting request from Robert. No agenda, no assistant copied. Just a time and a room. When I arrived, he was already seated. No laptop, no phone. He gestured to the chair across from him. "I wanted to talk without a structure," he said. I sat. "For years," he continued, "I thought efficiency meant minimizing friction." I waited. "What I didn't see," he said, "was that we'd minimized accountability along with it." He didn't say my name. He didn't apologize directly, but he didn't need to. "I relied on you," he said finally, "more than I realized, and without giving you the authority that should have come with that reliance. I nodded once. I'm saying this, he added, so you know it's been noticed. That was enough. The conversation ended shortly after. No commitments, no promises, just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, when it comes late, still carries weight. In the months that followed, my workdays changed. Not dramatically, just sustainably. I left on time more often. I stopped checking my phone at night. I declined meetings that didn't require my input. I focused on projects that had clear outcomes and ownership. The notebook remained on my desk. I still used it, but the pages filled more slowly. Not because less was happening, because less was being absorbed silently. At the end of the quarter, the company missed a minor operational target, nothing critical, but enough to prompt a review. During the post-mortem, someone said, "We used to catch these things earlier." Robert didn't look at me when he responded. "Yes," he said, "and now we catch them where they belong." No one argued. That was the moment I understood something important. The organization hadn't lost efficiency. It had redistributed it, and the cost of that redistribution was no longer invisible labor. It was shared responsibility. Outside of work, my life had changed in quieter ways. I took a week off without checking email. I traveled without my laptop. I reconnected with people I'd neglected because I was always on call for problems that weren't mine. The constant low-level tension was gone, not replaced by ambition or restlessness, replaced by clarity. One evening, while organizing old files at home, I found an earlier version of my resume. 6 years old. The responsibilities listed were modest, incomplete. I compared it to my current role description. The difference wasn't just in scope, it was in honesty. I updated the resume, not because I planned to leave, but because I finally could describe my work without exaggeration or omission. The system had caught up to reality, and so had I. The story didn't end with a promotion. It didn't end with applause or a speech, or a moment where everyone suddenly understood what they had almost lost. It ended the way most real shifts do, quietly. A year passed. The company continued operating. Some initiatives succeeded, others stalled. Leadership changed again, as it always does. New priorities emerged, old ones faded. I stayed. Not because I felt obligated, not because I was indispensable, because the role finally fit the work. The notebook remained part of my routine, same place on the desk, same first page reserved for timelines, same pen. But the way I used it had changed. I no longer tracked what I was absorbing. I tracked what I was choosing. What I noticed most wasn't how others treated me. It was how I treated my own time. When a request came in without clarity, I asked for it. When urgency was implied but not justified, I waited. When responsibility was vague, I made it explicit or declined it. No drama followed, just adjustment. The organization adapted the same way it always had, slowly, reluctantly, eventually. One afternoon, a new hire joined my team. Bright, capable, eager. During our onboarding conversation, she asked a simple question. "How do you manage the pressure here?" she said. I thought about it before answering. "I don't carry what isn't mine," I said. She nodded, writing it down. And I realized something then. That sentence would have felt impossible to say a year earlier. Not because it wasn't true, because I hadn't believed I was allowed to live that way. Near the end of the fiscal year, Robert announced his retirement. At his final town hall, he spoke about growth, resilience, and lessons learned, generic language, carefully chosen. As people stood to leave, he caught my eye across the room. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He gave a small nod. I returned it. That was all. No resolution needed. On my last day before the holidays, I closed the notebook and placed it in my drawer instead of taking it home. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to keep watch when I wasn't there. The systems would run, or they wouldn't. Either way, they would no longer depend on my silence. As I shut down my computer and turned off the lights, the office felt the same as it always had, but I didn't. I had learned something that took years longer than it should have. Dependability isn't proven by how much you absorb. It's proven by what still works when you step back. And walking away from unspoken expectations isn't abandonment, it's professionalism. I didn't change who I was. I changed where my responsibility ended, and that made all the difference.